Kia ora koutou, kia ora. Hi everyone. My name is Leon Usatini. I'm a researcher at the New Zealand Policy Research Institute at AUT, chairing today's session. And today we have Dr. Jaimie Monk from Motu, Economic and Public Policy Research, who'll be talking about her research into child behavioural problems in New Zealand and its link with parental income. Jaimie will talk for about 30 minutes and then we'll have time for questions after. Over to you, Jaimie.
Oh, thanks, Leon. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. Ko ai tēnei, ko Jaimie Monk taku ingoa. Ko kōti rana te whakapaparanga mai. Engari, ko whangamata te kāinga. Kia o tautahi o inoho ana. Tēnā koutou katoa. So kia ora everyone, I'm Jaimie. I whakapapa back to Scotland, but I do consider Whangamata and the Coromandel my home. But I'm living now down in Christchurch, where I work remotely as a fellow for Motu. For those of you that don't know Motu, we are a public good focused economics and public policy research institute. When people ask, I kind of say we are a bunch of mostly economists that like to make the world a bit of a better place with our research, which is a very fun place to work. I like to start these things by sort of giving my background a little bit, just so you know where I'm coming from, both probably statistically and conceptually as well. So my background is in economics and public policy academically, but I do really like to work across different disciplines to try and understand patterns of advantage and disadvantage in New Zealand, particularly as in relation to whānau and to children. I'm also a mum of three, which kind of informs a little bit of what I do, and maybe how I report what I do as well. But I kind of I try and understand child development in an ecological context, which many of you will get, that children develop in relationship to others, to their whānau and within the wider environment in which they operate. So that's probably where I'm coming from. This work I'm going to share with you today is from my recent report that uses data from growing up in New Zealand to try and understand differences in children's socio-emotional development across different income groups, and in particular with a focus on trying to understand the role of maternal stress in children's technology use. I had some great co-authors on this piece of work. So Dr. Kate Prickett and Professor Philip Morrison from Victoria University, and also Professor Arthur Grimes, who is with me at Motu too. The greatest joy, I think, for me in this project was working with some policy partners. And so they were involved right from the beginning in the planning stages, right the way through the process. And so I worked alongside the Child Wellbeing and Poverty Reduction team, who were at DPMC and have now shifted across to MSD. And we had someone involved from Te Puni Kōkiri and from Save the Children New Zealand, which has meant the work is nice and policy relevant, which is important. Quick introduction, how I've done what I've done, and then I'm going to share two lots of results, some longitudinal results, and then some more cross-sectional work, following with some conclusions. All right, so what were we interested in? These are probably the two key research questions as part of this project. Firstly, so does adequate household income help protect children from developing behaviour problems? And what roles do maternal stress and screen use play in this relationship? The data we've used is from growing up in New Zealand. Some of you will be quite familiar with, but it's an amazing longitudinal data source, and we've got data from more than 6,000 families from the Auckland and Waikato regions. So started 2019, these kids are sort of 14, 15. And the latest data that's come out is for 12-year-olds, but this project is focused on data from pregnancy through to the 8-year-old waves, which was what was available when we were doing it. Growing up in New Zealand is wonderful because it has quite a broad demographic group. This just is to show where I've pulled the data from. So the project split kind of into two groups. So we've got the first part of it, which focuses on stress, and that takes data from the pregnancy, 9-month and 2-year waves. Unfortunately, the stress measure didn't go further than that, so we've just had to restrict it to that part. And then the behaviour stuff takes from the 2-year, 4.5 and 8-year waves. So this is the joys of working with data someone else has collected, but we've kind of made it work as we go. In terms of the variables, our outcome, I've labelled this child behaviour. We're looking at socio-emotional development measured through the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. Child behaviour is probably a little bit shorthand for that, but I wanted to make sure this was quite accessible to a general audience. That and saying socio-emotional development a million times over is a bit hard work. So we've gone with child behaviour. And the strengths and difficulties questionnaire has been used internationally very frequently, particularly in these sorts of situations. And it's actually in our before school checks as well. So the outcome I'm looking at is the difficulty score, overall difficulty score, which covers 4 different domains. So conduct problems, hyperactivity, peer relationship problems, and emotional problems. So for those 4, the 5th one is a strengths measure, which looks at pro-social behaviour. I've done a little bit of work on that as well, so I'll talk about that as we go. Most of the work uses the difficulty score. Our other main variables, income is household income split into 7 different bands, which I've transformed in a few different ways. You probably can read about in the report if you want to. Screen use refers to the number of hours children have watched screens at home during the last weekday, which was the measure that we could get across all the different waves. And maternal stress is a summation of answers to 7 different questions on potential sources of stress. And so these cover worry about things like housing difficulties or family conflict. And it's on a scale, so it measures how stressful the mother finds these things. And I like this measure more than the ones that sort of just count number of stresses in someone's life, because it kind of captures the fact that different people respond differently to different types of stress. I should also say that I've pulled this all, we're using mother reported data here. I would love to have included partner data, which Growing Up in New Zealand does actually get. Unfortunately, it was quite biased. And so if I restricted the sample just to those that had mother and father data, we were going to end up with losing a large number of the kids with high problem behavior scores that I was interested in. So we're focusing on mothers. My results probably do, I would imagine, generalize across both parents, potentially, depending on how involved the partner is, but that's why we're focusing in on mothers here. So I'm going to start now by showing you a couple of distributional graphs. I really like to start with distributions because they give us an indication of what's happening across the board. But this one here is the distribution of difficulty scores by household income group for 2-year-olds. And so we can see here that the low income group has, which is the dotted dashed line here, the highest scores, and then the high income group has the lowest difficulty scores. But it's not deterministic, there's still a number of children in the low income group that have got low difficulty scores and a number of children in the high income group that have got high difficulty scores too. So that's why distributions are important. But I think the main point of this is to say that there is an income gradient. And I haven't shown this graph because it's busy, but if I map it by all 7 income bands, we get this perfect lining up of difficulty scores for each, as each income group goes up. So there's definitely something happening there. However, this is what we get for the different strength scores. We can see that there's no real difference, and this is across the age groups. We don't see any real difference in strengths or scores or pro-social behaviour across the income groups. I was kind of expecting to see an opposite relationship, but so I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. Some child development people might be able to help me more, but basically I think it's not necessary that a child that has behavior problems is also low on pro-social behavior too. They can be very good at being concerned for other children or things like that, but still have issues with other kinds of behavior. So this is the distribution of difficulty scores by maternal stress at 2 years. And again, we can see this similar kind of relationship. So mothers that have high levels of stress have children with higher difficulty scores. I suspect this relationship is probably bidirectional too. If anyone's parented a 2-year-old that's having severe tantrums, you'll know the stress levels may go up as well. But yes, so this is the associations that we see here. This is at 4.5 years. We can see the same income gradient here, and at 8 years. Also still got the same income gradient. The scores decrease over time, but we can see within that we're still picking up this income gradient across each wave. But I wanted to just stop and kind of take a moment to understand longitudinal data and how we can look at it. Many of you might be aware, but there's sort of two main approaches to dealing with longitudinal data when we're looking at these sorts of things. And the first is to try and understand the differences between the groups. So what are the differences in difficulty scores between a low income group and between a high income group? So we do that, we can control for a bunch of things that we might have available data on. But we're still here looking at associations. So this kind of work is important, particularly for policy stuff, if you want to understand groups of people. So I've done some of this work doing multivariate OLS regression and also a Gelbach decomposition, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But the second approach we can take is exploiting the amazing benefits of longitudinal data like growing up in New Zealand, and that we can not just see the differences between groups, but we can understand differences within the same individual or family over time. And while this is not sort of strictly causal, it gets us a lot further along the pathway towards causality. So in this situation, what we're doing is comparing families, and during periods where income is high and periods where income is low, we can see the differences in the kids' difficulty scores. And so for this work, I've used a fixed effects approach, and that looks at the difference, looks at changes over time. Yeah, it helps to control for things such as a parent's upbringing, these sorts of things which are really important, particularly in child development. So I'm going to start with some longitudinal results. This graph here is probably the central finding of the report. And this is showing us the relationship between income and child difficulties using a fixed effects approach. So we're comparing the same family with the same child with themselves over different time periods. And I've included in here an interaction term for the wave in which the data was collected. And so we can see here that during the preschool years, which are the two graphs that are two lines that are angled down, periods where income is higher, child behavior problems are lower. But that's not the case at 8 years of age, where that blue line there is horizontal. I think this sort of talks to the importance of the first 1,000 or the first 2,000 days. You might be familiar with a lot of the work on that, and we can see in here in this New Zealand data, yes, we're picking up the same things here. Should also say the effect sizes here are not huge, they're pretty modest. But I think part of that is picking up on the fact that we have used income bands because that was what was available. And so only 7 income bands means that an increase or a decrease of income has to be pretty substantial before it gets picked up as a change. And this particular type of modeling models changes. So I think we're probably getting a reasonably large underreporting of effect size here. Yeah, so hopefully that contextualizes that a little bit. I'm shifting back now a little bit in time to we're looking here at the pregnancy to 2 years of age and the relationship between income and maternal stress. We can see, it's probably not overly surprising that in periods where income is higher, maternal stress is lower, and vice versa when we're comparing the same mother with herself over time. The effect size is larger during pregnancy and at 2 years of age, but is smaller at 9 months of age. 9 months might be parents at home happily, so mother's still at home, I'm not sure. And then at 2 years of age, again, parenting a 2-year-old could be stressful, might be pregnant again, these sorts of things happening, but that's what this graph is picking up. Okay, and our final fixed effects graph here is the relationship between screen use and child behavior. And again, I've included these wave interactions, which are significant. So we can see here, there's again, this very different relationship between 8 years of age and the preschool waves. with this increasing graph between screen use and child difficulty scores during the preschool waves. So during the preschool years, when screen use is lower, child behavior problems are lower. Not apparent at 8 years. The line does look like it's going the opposite direction, but that one's not actually significant. Before I jump up and down about the evils of screen time, I think we probably need to consider these findings within the wider literature, which is actually a lot less clear on this, particularly when it comes to screen time, than many of the policy people might get you. The screen time limits might have you notice. It's actually quite up in the air, the effect of screen time on kids' behavior. Also, this is a fixed effects model which controls for things that are unchanging over time. Could potentially be seeing something like that happening here. The general life, home environment being more stressful, more screens, more behavior problems happening too. So yes, we found this. Don't make too much. don't rip the iPad away from your 4-year-old 24/7 now, like, just because of this. This following section was kind of driven from questions from my policy partners who ask useful questions like, well, why is this actually happening? So that's been helpful to have them prodding and asking these things. So what I've done is I have developed these, I've called them pathway maps. But what I've done is I've used, this is all cross-sectional work, I need to make sure. So we're looking purely at associations here. Done something called a Gelbach decomposition. And applied this to a number of regressions looking at our outcome of child difficulty scores. So what happens when you have a normal regression? You know, if you're looking at the effective income on child behavior, you know, you run your regression and you get a coefficient for income. But we know that that's probably not the real relationship. We need to control for other things as well. So we might say add in education and mother's age to our equation. And what that will do is it will generally decrease this coefficient for income. But what happens is if adding in variables, it's actually important what order you add them in as to how it changes this coefficient for income. And so what Gelbach has done, there's a paper in labor economics if anyone's interested in following this up, but he's done developed this decomposition where it pulls apart how much the addition of each extra variable affects and changes the coefficient for your initial one, or income in this case. So what I have done is I have applied that to our equations estimating child behavior by income and use that to try and disentangle what factors are actually driving the differences in child behavior by income. So, and then I have mapped them onto a diagram. So I want to emphasize that this is somewhat conceptual in the sense, but I have taken the results and applied them across. And it's not a formal mediation analysis either, in the same way that you might through, say, structural equation modeling, that sort of thing. But it is helpful for the policy people in understanding the relationship between a whole lot of different factors. This here maps all the different variables that I've included in my equation between income and child difficulty scores for 2-year-olds. Okay, so we're looking just at 2-year-olds here. We can see here the box on the far right. These are the variables that once we controlled for everything were not associated with child difficulties. So partner status, housing tenure, DEP index score, a whole bunch of different things here. I've partialed out the covariates that I think are affecting both things in this bottom left box here. The box underneath difficulty scores they're the variables that directly affect child difficulties but are not associated with income. So children's sex at birth, the number of siblings, how often they wake in the night. But the box that's really interesting is this one in the top middle here, probable mediators. So these are listed in a list of importance, the variables that are changing this estimate for income the most. So we've got hostile parenting, which is first and most important. Hostile parenting captures how much a parent argues and yells at their children, belittles them. So lots of negative behaviors that we don't really want in parenting. So hostile parenting stress, which is strongly associated with hostile parenting, reading, screen use, child health, that's general health, positive parenting and protective parenting. And what you can see here is these are all very strongly, they're all part of the package of the mother-child relationship. And so again, this is picking up on a lot of the other research in the child development space, of all about the importance of, serve and return interactions between parents and children on the development of children's brain architecture, these sorts of things. It's just cool. I found it very cool to find that we're picking this up within this New Zealand data in such a clear and consistent way. I haven't put in a slide for 4.5-year-olds because it's almost identical to what we see for the 2-year-old results. This one here is for the 8-year-olds. And I'm just going to pull up, I guess, draw your attention to the top middle box again. And we can see it's actually quite different to the ones we found at 2 years of age. So here, the most important variables are to do with child health, residential mobility, how often people are moving house, and waking, how often kids are waking in the night. And to a lesser extent, screen use, hostile parenting, and mother's stress. And this fits the developmental pattern of what's important for children as they get older. When they're younger, in the preschool years, it is all about the relationship with their close family. As kids get older, there starts to be more important what's happening in the rest of the world, I guess, and health being super important as a part of this picture as well. There is I keep finding quite strong relationship between children's physical health and their socio-emotional development. It's not fun to be unwell, funnily enough. And yeah, again, emphasizing this relationship with income. So it's the kids that are in the lower income families that are having worse health, and this is seems to be affecting their behavior too. I'm just going to talk quickly about, I've developed these maps as well for the relationship between income and stress during the early years, so pregnancy, 9 months, and 2 years of age. This was, again, at the request of the policy, people who are doing a lot of work at the moment in maternal mental health and well-being and how that affects children and children's development. And so we can see here that this is during pregnancy. This top box here, the things that are driving this relation, the differences in stress by income, are again to do with health. This is mother's health, general health, as reported by them. And then we've got housing tenure and NZ deprivation index score. So I've used that kind of as a neighbourhood proxy in this one. Interestingly, down the bottom, we can see here, not associated with stress is education and age. Some of what is typically considered the social determinants, maybe, are not part of this picture. But also associated with stress is how many children kids have, mothers have, and how frequently they're moving house. At 9 months of age, we look at these probable mediators. Again, we're looking at health, housing tenure, and residential mobility. And again, at 2 years of age, we've got health, tenure, and residential mobility. And so it looks like for mothers during pregnancy and in the early years, health and housing are really important in terms of levels of stress. And we can see that stress is obviously having effects on children down the line as well. So I'm currently doing a project. I'm involved in a project at the New Zealand Centre for Sustainable Cities at Otago, which is looking at the effect of housing and housing tenure in particular on children's well-being. And so just trying to pull out some of this, extend this work a little bit and point out that yes, housing quality and housing affects children's physical health, but there's also a relationship between housing in the New Zealand context anyway, and parental well-being, and therefore children's well-being too. I'll just pull out a few of my final conclusions. So mothers with higher household incomes have preschool children, with fewer behaviour problems, and that this relationship persists even when socio-demographic and parenting differences were accounted for. And they remain statistically significant when the same households were examined over time. Mothers in higher income households have less stress and less child screen use. And both stress and screen use explain some of the association between income and children's behavioural development. Most of the relationships we're finding are concentrated in the early years. So overall, I think this evidence, as a big picture, suggests that higher income might be decreasing stress on mothers, and that decreased stress might be freeing them up for more engaged parenting, leading to sort of a decreased likelihood of children's behaviour problems. That's my overall impression of from the work that I've done here. In terms of policy implications, I think it's suggesting that sufficient income is important for supporting children's socio-emotional development, particularly during the preschool years or the first 2,000 days. Also, any policy interventions that increase parental well-being are likely to have flow-on benefits, particularly for young children. And this is something I like to jump up and down about whenever I get the chance. But if for those that are, whether government agencies or in the charitable sector, providing social support services, making sure those services are easy to access and simple in their processes, consistent, and anything that basically decreases stress on parents and those that are engaging with them will actually have further subsequent, potentially have subsequent wellbeing benefits for children as well. I should also say that health and housing support are particularly important for expectant and new mothers' wellbeing. And screen use. Screen use shouldn't be considered in isolation, particularly when it comes to parental stress. We did find some associations between higher screen use and more behaviour problems, but we do need to make sure we're considering that in the wider context. Awesome. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. Any questions, sing out. Otherwise, I've put my email address there if there's anything you wanted to follow up with me about. I'm super happy to talk further about anything. Otherwise, happy to take some questions now.
I'll kick us off then. Thank you, Jaimie, for that very clear and articulate overview of your research. Call me a policymaker, but I love the conceptual maps too. And it's a very complex issue and also a topical one. I found there was a Herald article earlier this year. The title was "Report Finds New Zealand Students Among Worst Behaved in OECD." I think it was piece of data, though it wasn't very clear. So obviously a very topical issue too. My question is, I was thinking about the mother-partner relationship, mother-father relationship. One wonders, what role that plays, how mothers interact with their partners, and if they're arguing a lot, does this have an influence on how children behave? Did you look at that at all?
No, not directly. I know there is some other literature sort of looking at family stress in general that's picked up on that. I did run it through some of my initial models, and it didn't seem particularly relevant, funnily enough. There was a few data issues for me in terms of including that. I can't help but think that would probably be part of it. I think there's sort of family environments that are more high stress and more conflict, have more conflict in them, and that's obviously not good for children.
Noting that children these days with working parents spend a lot of time in early childhood education and care, do you think there could be an association with parental income and quality of ECE, e.g. nannies versus noisy ECE centres?
It's a good question. Probably not my area of expertise in terms of quality of ECE. I wasn't able to include those in my models because I had to choose between employment or care, the number of hours in care. But I will say it seems that parents that are working have higher levels of stress, which I suspect is trying to balance life. But that level of stress didn't seem to transition to the kids as much. Obviously, if you're a highly stressed mother, that's not father in this that's not around, that stress is not associated so strongly with children. So yeah, I'm not so sure about quality of ECE. That would be a question for someone that has a little bit more experience in the ECE sector and research than I do.
Back to your question, Leon. Jaimie, you mentioned that a number of children with high levels of behavioural problems, their mothers didn't have partner report, so you excluded them from the data. So I was just wondering if, that's not what you did. Could you talk through that? Because I was just wondering if that was a source of bias, or if that mothers who don't have partner data might be more stressed. That could perhaps be an implication of the relationship, being willing to fill in a form on your partner.
Yeah, sorry, I probably didn't explain that one too clearly. So I've only used mother data, and the reason I've done that is because if I included only those that had the partner data, it was going to be biased, because the families that only had mother and no partner data had much higher difficulty scores, and so I have included all of them.
Right.
If that makes sense. But yeah, it's really interesting. I have a whole. The other thing I'm really interested in is missing data. It does. It's a very, I can include in my models a predictor of whether a father has filled out the survey is a very strong predictor of a lot of child outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just on Leon's point, I believe that the Growing Up in New Zealand study themselves have actually published quite a lot about the impacts of the relationship between the parents or the partners, and that, so that's pretty well known already. So it's great to have your data sort of like clipping onto that.
Yeah, there's lots of really interesting research using Growing Up in New Zealand. We're very lucky to have it, and they're lucky to have it still going, just.
Absolutely.
I've recently done my PhD with longitudinal data with the Pacific Island Family Study. And I just want to say that my results really reflected your results. I was looking at parenting practices and their effects on child behavior. And likewise, I found, economics to be the major issue for maladaptive child behavior. And pro-social behavior wasn't affected by economics. The major thing there was actually education. So I found very different things. Different things were affecting the different types of behaviors. And I just wanted to say to Leon in that research that I did look at intimate partner violence effects on child behavior, and we found it was associated with internalizing behavior throughout between ages 2 and 14. So, my question though, Jaimie, was, do you consider also, because in my research, I realized more and more that the challenging child behavior also increases the stress of the parent. So it's kind of bidirectional.
Yeah.
But I couldn't think of any way to really research that with the cross-sectional study. Did you think about that at all, or how to approach that?
Yeah, no, I definitely did. And it is a limitation, I guess. Being able to do these longitudinal fixed effects models can help a little bit, but that doesn't really help with the bidirectional stuff. Yeah, I think I'd be interested to have extended this and done some sort of autoregressive cross-lag modeling or something that might be able to pick up some of those directional things a bit more. But yeah, it's definitely a part of the picture. So we can learn what we can with the data we have and the way we explore it. So, but yes, thank you for raising that.
We have a question here from Eileen. She says, it would be interesting to consider this alongside paternal income for solo mothers, in particular how child support is so poorly paid and enforced. I can imagine the stress of managing that relationship and lack of income would be important to consider.
I think you're probably very right about that. I don't think this data has quite, most of my models, whether a parent is sole parent or not, doesn't seem to be a big part of things, which surprised me. I think that's probably more a data thing than it is what's actually going on. And I think back to the non-response kind of bias, I think solo parents doing it hard are less likely to be involved long-term in a study like this, just because the sheer effort of managing life is probably pretty big. So the ones that are in the study, I suspect, are probably the ones that are doing well and managing life well. But that's really hard to know.
Go ahead, Liz.
Kia ora, Jaimie. I've got a number of things that are kind of going through my head, and I'm not sure. I'll just, one of the things that I'm curious to get your response to is the screen time variable. So the screen time variable was screen use in the most recent school work day, right? And obviously a number of those parents will have kids at daycare and will have absolutely no idea how much screens is being used. So, and also there's an income divide there, right, around screen time. You know, those who can afford daycare, particularly in those early years before the 20 hours free daycare. So I've kind of got some real concerns around the use of that particular measure and trying to sort of the implications of sort of the blaming of the parent for putting the kid in front of the screen, when in actual fact there's kids that are at home with their parents during the day, maybe from lower incomes and may not be in the daycare getting less screen time. So is it, you know, there's some complexity there that I'm not really sure you're getting at by using that particular variable, and I sort of worry about the implications of this, about blaming parents for putting kids in front of their screens when in actual fact it can be, you know, parents need time out, and it's, you know, and I'm not sure that's really nuanced in the report. I wondered if you could reflect on why you chose that variable and what you think.
Yeah, well, I definitely chose the variable because it was the only one available. And some of the other work I did, you can definitely see that pattern. So parents, particularly with the 2-year-olds, parents that are at home with their kids have much higher levels of screen time. And as a stay-at-home mum who stayed at home with three preschoolers, I can definitely attest you do need time out, and sometimes that's the only way to do it. And maybe that didn't come through in the report enough. Thank you for that feedback. Some of the media I've done and things subsequently, I've tried hard to talk about that, particularly the blame on parents, because I think there's a lot of the mental load, the sort of expectations of good parenting are high enough. And I don't think jumping up and down about screen time rules and hours of use, you know, limit your children to this number of hours, is at all warranted by the evidence that's out there. And all that does is put extra stress on parents, which from the rest of what I'm looking at, seems to be detrimental to children. So I thoroughly agree with how it reflects in all the data. It's really hard to tease out. But yes, I think you're probably onto something with what you're talking about.
Did you look at book reading and some of those other sort of positive behaviors? Like, what made you drew you into just looking at the negative stuff with people who live in poverty? I mean, there's so many really positive variables in there in that data set about how parents engage with children. Did you consider any of those?
Yeah, so reading's in there. The reason I've ended up with this came out of my thesis. And so I was my PhD thesis, which was originally I was interested in the mental load of poverty. And so how having to deal with the intensity of a lack of resources just takes it out of people. There's the whole literature in behavioral economics on this. But no one had kind of looked at it in the context of parenting before. And so that's the original direction I went. And so then I was trying to find a parenting behavior that might be reflected in this mental load. And there was a lot of talk on screen use at the time. And so that's why I ended up with that one. Reading I do incorporate in there, and reading is positively associated with it does pretty much the opposite to what screen time does in most of my models. So you'll pick up a little bit of that in there.
So thanks for sharing that, because I think so often we get stuck in this narrative of this negative blaming and of these things, and we really need to uplift these positive stories, because I think that we forget that actually these parents that are at home with their kids are doing really, really great things, and it would be great to see more of that emphasised in that report, some of the good stuff, rather than the sort of the negative stereotypes that are coming out. That'd be great.
Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Jinlin.
Yes, Zhenlin Wang from Massey University. I'm a child developmental researcher. Just to pick up from what's said about trying to portray the family and child development from a positive light. Your outcome focused on difficulty scores, but there was no association between income and prosocial behavior. This is consistent with adult literature too, that being rich or poor doesn't very much affect prosocial tendencies. But there are some factors, for example, unpredictability in early years. You mentioned moving house or mother changing partners or a family member suffering from mental health issues. These factors probably are more salient in the developmental outcomes. Some argue that being in that unpredictable environment, you probably tend to be more prosocial because you need to build up that social support system. You are very familiar with the data set. So do you have any insight on what kind of variables might fit in that unpredictability category?
I think some of them were picked up in the stress measure in terms of moving in terms of housing stress and stress around other families, other family members that, yeah, again, could be sick or with mental distress, things like that. Yeah, it's a very interesting data set that is endlessly interesting. I do really like your hypothesis there, and I have been reflecting on that a little bit lately in terms of some of the other well-being outcomes that I'm looking at for my current work, because I do think there does need to be that social. There is some of the higher income families I see and the parents. The data I have on the parents there, they are very much seem to be living much more individualistic kind of lives. And so, I mean, my current work I see, so I've got an outcome on family cohesion, and you see higher levels of family cohesion in some of these lower income groups, and some of the groups that are, would look disadvantaged by other measures, but actually have these much higher levels of family cohesion, which is quite cool. So I'm looking forward to bringing that out in my next work.
We have a follow-up question from Liz here. I also understand there are ethnic differences in the SDQ and that this is not invariant across ethnicity. Did you consider this?
Yes, I did. And there's a reason I haven't gone in on ethnicity for this report, and that would be one of the main reasons why. I've talked about it a little bit in terms of one of the limitations of the SDQ. And again, this is what happens when you have data. The SDQ in growing up in New Zealand is probably the only reasonably well-validated thing that's captured over time in terms of these sorts of things. And so I've had to use it. That is definitely one of the limitations of using it. I should also say that what I've been doing with this is coming at it with a policy lens, in the sense that we need to try and find ways of changing things. And the joy of being able to do longitudinal data and looking at families over time is it's not just comparing, say, low-income families and saying that you got, this group is doing bad parenting, but it's saying that, okay, the same family over time, when they are in a financially stressful situation, it's harder on them than when they're not. So that's one of the reasons why I really, really like doing these kind of fixed effects and kind of longitudinal approaches to it. So yes, I'm picking up on some of this stuff, but the overall message is that the same family in different situations, outcomes are different for children.
One of the things for me is that this study comes out and clearly says that we just need to pay parents more. That you can say, look at the screen time and all the different things, but the main association is that income relates to poor outcomes. And I'm wondering to what extent that you feel that this report was noticed in terms of that effect and people are thinking about it, because it seems to be just a pattern we come back to again and again and again. Poverty makes a difference.
Yes, there's a political question in this too. Which is always a tricky one. I feel, I was lucky that I was able to work with the Child Wellbeing and Poverty Reduction team on this, and was able to present my findings to their whole team and talk them through it as they were developing the new child and youth wellbeing plan. So I feel like I've done what I can to make it, put it out there. It's hard. My next project, I'd love to do after this, if I can find funding for it, is to get into the IDI and look at Best Start, when, families suddenly get $2,000, what that effect is long-term on kids. And so you can say, even particularly from a social investment point, you can invest in this and these are what the long-term outcomes are. trying to speak the language of the day a little bit, but yeah, it is important, and we do what we can do with the data we've got, and put the message out there, and hope that it gets taken on board. Yeah.
Thank you, Jaimie, and thanks everyone for attending.